a binary choice between either one or the other. Now, geometric shapes do tend to be more suited to creation using vectors, like I've done here in Illustrator, but that's not always the case. And because geometric shapes are more simple, they can be broken down into simple vector coordinates. They are more easily manipulated by animation, especially with the animation tools that we have like After Effects, where you can manipulate vectors over time by keyframing the shape path, for example. Now, as mentioned, shape language is how we communicate meaning just using shape. Shape design, I'm going to distinguish as being how we construct them to be pleasing. So language specifically is what those shapes are saying. So there are three basic geometric shapes: the square, the triangle, and the circle. Any shape can be broken down into these, and each one will kind of give a different feeling, a different emotion. Square shapes are more stable, they are more secure, they are balanced, they have a flat, solid base, they're not going to move, they're not going to tip anywhere. The triangle may be a bit more dangerous, has sharp edges, but it could also be energetic, maybe have more motion to it. And the circle is very soft, be very friendly, perhaps more cute. So you'd maybe use more square language if we were communicating maybe a bank, maybe some columns, maybe security, maybe a vault, something like that. A triangle is much more pointy, think of nails or thorns or spikes, but also something lithe and elegant as well. But a circle, round edge, nothing's gonna hurt us. This is more fun, more playful. Of course, this is all in the general sense. One circle to your design isn't going to make the whole thing friendly. Now, this is often best demonstrated with character design, so that's what I'm going to do as well, because these shapes do have an emotion and a character they bring with them, and that's maybe the easiest way to show how shape language works. So here we've got some square language, some amazing designs here, and these characters seem very sturdy, very reliable, maybe even stubborn. In a fantasy setting, these might be our dwarf characters, maybe boxy and strong, reliable, and of course these characters have some triangles in them, some circles in them, some round edges, some pointy edges, but their overall shape tends to lean towards a more square, boxy style. Now, these characters with a lot of triangles, they have a lot more points, more angles. They are often sometimes villains as well, perhaps with more spikes, they're more dangerous. But triangles don't just show danger, they can also show speed, motion, energy. A lot like we talked about in the composition lesson with more angles. They can be cunning, fast, quick, agile, especially with this illustration of the jockey on the horse here. So in a fantasy setting, these could be maybe our elves, which are thin and lithe, or an evil queen perhaps, or a dark lord covered in spikes. Triangular shape language is probably the most diverse in that regard. Now, circular characters. These are more friendly, more soft. These are not as threatening. There's no edges that we can hurt ourselves on. And most motion design characters and character design does fall into this category because we're generally making commercial ads where we have protagonists and characters that are showing how fun or great the product is.
Anh cá ai làm motion lâu kiểu gì cũng phải từng một lần làm cái kiểu nhân vật mà không cứ đầu đầu nhỏ thân to này.
Kiểu corporate
Đúng
illustration.
rồi, kiểu corporate thật, trông nó thế nào nhỉ? Thực ra như này thì đỡ này, mấy cái trông cái flat design trông nó sẽ hơi kiểu ờ có.
We rarely have villains or characters with immense strength that we need to show. In a fantasy setting, these may be our hobbits or more maybe our humans, but these tend to be a lot more friendly, inoffensive, and more joyful to look at. And generally, if we have angles, the wider the angles, the more round they are, the more friendly. And as the angles get sharper and sharper, they get less friendly and move more towards triangular language. Now, here are some great character designs by Olympia Zignoli. And I love these because they just use shapes, really basic shapes to build out all these different characters. And you probably have an emotional reaction to these. A different feeling emerges when you look at each of them and they have a bit of a personality. To me, the round ones seem the most friendly, the ones I'd want to hang out with the most, especially this yellow one seems very soft, very pleasant. Whereas the angular ones seem maybe a bit more dangerous, maybe a bit more standoffish. You feel as though if this was a party and these 8 people were here, they would each have different personalities. And we're getting that just from the shapes used to describe them, because their facial expressions are pretty much all the same. So firstly, you do have to figure out what are you trying to communicate with the elements? What are we drawing? Are we making something that is secure and solid, or is it dynamic and exciting, or is it soft and friendly? And that can help lead us to the choices of what kind of shapes we're going to use to communicate that. Because everything that we create in a design, from the rectangles, the text boxes, to the type itself, is made of shapes, and we can use those to communicate more information and more emotion to the viewer. So here's an example I've drawn of a snail on a rock. Let's imagine we got that brief. We need to show a snail on a rock. But what kind of a rock is it? We can push the stylization, the shape of that rock, to communicate what kind of environment the snail
Hello anh Hiếu, đang vào ngồi học thế.
Hello anh.
Hello thầy Hiếu. Buổi học cuối tuần tí anh ạ. Mấy cái này vẫn kiến thức cơ bản lắm. Cái này chắc mọi người biết rồi nhưng mà không sao, cứ ngồi xem biết đâu lại có cái gì đấy hay nhỉ. Chứ mình chắc cũng sơ sơ, ai hào làm design cũng sơ sơ biết là hình vuông thì chắc chắn, hình nhọn thì cảm giác nguy hiểm, tốc độ hình tròn thì thân thiện, đúng không? Đi làm UX UI làm sao mà không người làm design gì thì những cái này nó cũng là những cái cảm giác cơ bản về hình khối rồi. Sao gửi cười chết rồi hay không biết. Cứ xem nhỉ. Phải xem chứ, kiểu hợp lý. Uầy, ở đây có quả dạy pen tool này. Anh thấy là dạy pen tool quan trọng vãi luôn. Kiểu cái buổi hôm qua anh làm cái phát này này, làm cái phát
Logo đấy.
logo, xong rồi kiểu phải vẽ, chết rồi, vẽ mấy cái đường, xong rồi không thể nào kiểu làm cho nó tròn được ấy. Bắt đầu phải ui mẹ, quả này là do mình skip, mình không học pen tool cho nó cẩn thận thực tế, vẽ ra trông nó cứ bị kiểu gãy gãy ấy. Nhìn cứ bị gãy gãy. Xong rồi anh còn phải hỏi đến thầy Quang. Mọi người mà làm phông thì chắc chắn mọi người biết là từng cái kiểu vector một như thế là nó cực kỳ quan trọng, handle nó phải tính toán rất cẩn thận, điểm nào đặt cái chấm này, điểm nào đặt cái điểm vertex, xong rồi handle nó phải dài như nào, handle nó cắt vào nhau như nào này. Đấy. Thì anh chỉ cho anh đúng một cái gọi là gợi ý thôi, đấy là đặt những cái điểm ở những cái điểm cực đại, kiểu điểm xa nhất của cái chỗ xa nhất của cái đường vòng cung đấy thì đặt một cái điểm ở đấy, xong rồi những cái handle thì nó không được phép cắt vào nhau. Ờ, đại khái là như thế. Bây giờ sai thì cũng công nhận có phết. Hello mọi người, tiếp tục nha, tiếp tục này, ngồi quay.
Snails in. This snail here seems very secure. It's on a nice square block, but these triangular ones, they seem a bit more dangerous. Maybe this is more of a, threatening landscape, a barren wasteland. And this one on the right, they're more friendly. These are sort of big, round, almost soft rocks. And these triangular ones, the snail obviously has some sort of a, moisture suction grip that is stuck to the rock on. But if this was a different character, they would be forced to grip onto this in another way, or they'd be rolling down, creating that kind of motion and sense of energy. And the round one in particular looks more playful because these rocks could kind of just roll around. These are the kind of rocks you generally only see when they've been rounded by water in a river for a long time. So they do have that sense of being much softer. Maybe softer isn't the right word, but smoother, not jagged and rough from the angles. And each of these communicates a different emotion. So it's important first to assess what we're trying to communicate and then use our shapes to reinforce that. And of course, these aren't the only three options. These shapes as well are a spectrum. You don't just choose one type of shape. We make things from a combination of shapes, and they might lean one way or the other. They might favor one type of shape in the silhouette, but maybe a different type of shape in the details. And one way to really emphasize this is you take an element that is normally one particular shape, like maybe a ball that it would be normally circular, and if you make it a bit angular, you add some square design language, it would stand out and make you think, oh, that basketball, for example, isn't round, it is really angular for some reason, and that gives a whole different interpretation of that image. You're going to see it as more maybe abstracted and see it less as a free-flowing object that is going to bounce around easily between people. Now it might seem like a more of a burden to hold that might be a heavy weight for a player to carry. Now, a very simple demonstration of this spectrum is to show the corners on a rectangle, specifically the rounded corners that you'll often come across when designing user interface elements, but as well as characters or anything really. Rectangles are probably the most common building block in design and illustration, and how much or whether you choose to round the corners will have an impact. So generally, the more rounded they are, the more friendly and inviting you are. Now, I find the biggest difference is between 90 degrees and then maybe a radius of even 1 or 2 pixels. Just taking that very edge off makes a huge difference, that we're not seeing this point here. It doesn't feel as potentially angular or as aggressive. Now, in another example, let's imagine a crocodile design. We've got lots of sharp teeth. In this example, we're trying to communicate danger with this sharpness. We're communicating fear with this triangular language. This is sharp. You don't want to be around this. This will hurt you if it touches you. And the longer and thinner a tooth is, if we select the points on all these teeth and make them longer and thinner, the more dangerous it becomes. And if we make them smaller, the less dangerous it seems. And rounding works well in particular as well for this. So in any corner that Illustrator will see, it'll have this little circle that we can click and drag to round it. But if we select more than one shape, I'm going to hold shift and select all of these points so we can edit them at once. I have my direct selection tool selected as well. The keyboard shortcut for that is A. There we can click and drag these and make these rounded. And you can see how rounding them makes them much less threatening. These teeth, less threatening than these teeth. And if we go all the way to the top, these are not threatening at all. These are nice and round and soft. This is pure circular design. And we can reduce that circular language till it gets more and more triangular, till it's completely triangular. And that's the most sharp, pointy, fearful, and threatening of all. Now, this is a very literal example of specifically teeth, the objects that will hurt you, and they are the element of the danger. So by shaving them off, we're kind of reducing that very literally, but it could also be a concept that you're explaining maybe with a typeface. These are two typefaces, both available on Adobe Fonts. Rebecca Grimm has very triangular pointed design language. That seems a little more threatening when shown with triangular language. Whereas then the rounded Copia's bold, it seems a lot more friendly and welcoming. The same words, but communicated with different shapes, have a different meaning. And here's a fun example from the designer Michael Wilkinson. This is a series of two designs showing the 9-to-5 grind. And what I really like how he's used particular circular language for pretty much anything that is natural. The humans, the trees, the ducks, and the clouds. But for anything man-made and oppressive in this story, the building and the city behind, they're all made of squares, rectangular, and triangular shaped language. I thought this was a great way to exaggerate the use of those shapes to communicate the sort of friendly and alive natural ideas, but then this solid behemoth of a building and a city that is oppressive. Let's go back a bit to geometric and organic shapes. So you might see shapes kind of generally badged into geometric shapes and organic shapes. Geometric are the more mathematically determined that have angles that can be calculated perfectly, and organic shapes are much more loose, more free-flowing, and more naturally occurring. But I do feel as though it's more helpful to think of organic shapes, or maybe organicness, as a spectrum that we can use to push our shapes into and away from as necessary depending on what we want to communicate. So where we have a lot of imperfections in their lines and more wonky angles that make up the shape, this can give a more organic, natural appearance to the shape itself, which can be independent from how secure or energetic or friendly the shape language is. We can represent all of these geometric shapes more organically. Here I've shown them with a more hand-drawn application. And I would recommend if you are creating shapes like these that are loose versions of geometric shapes, try to draw them yourself with a pen tool or a pencil tool rather than starting off with a geometric shape and then adding vertices or points to make it more organic, more complicated. I think it's quicker to get a more natural result if you're not starting off being constrained by the existing angles and points that might give away its kind of geometricness. And I will quickly pull up the pencil tool because I do think it is a very underused tool. The shortcut is N, and you just click and drag even with your mouse. You can create very organic looking shapes very easy, much quicker than doing it with the pen tool. And then of course we can adjust from there if you are wanting to make nice loose shapes like this. Now organic shapes can give a more accurate depiction of natural things, but they do definitely carry an emotion as well. So in this example, we have two designs of cocktails, one geometric and the other organic. And these are just about the two most extreme ends of that spectrum. Both, I think, are fantastic. Both are great designs, but they do give a different energy. This one by Studio Muti is very refined, very stylish. Not necessarily serious, but classy. This is what you might find at a posh cocktail bar. This one by Leva Falcaru, full of energy. This one is a party. This design is about having fun. We don't draw straight lines. There's no time. You should be drinking. You should be dancing. You should be carefree, enjoying yourself. And to further enhance the emotional communication of this design, we're not worried about perspective. This is casual. It is fun. Now this one on the left, also fun, but a much different fun. And generally our first instinct is often to use organic shapes kind of stereotypically to present more naturally occurring elements like plants, animals, rather than mechanically designed man-made objects like robots and furniture that are generally built by humans. Those might tend to leave with geometric shapes. But there is a lot of nuance in there. Organic shapes can also be drawn with incredible precision. They don't need to be as loose and carefree as they are here. You can use organic shapes to soften the design of something and make it feel a bit more natural and inviting, but still be very considered and deliberate with its shape. You don't have to be hand-drawn like this. It can still be incredibly refined. Take these examples from Raphael Mignani. The majority of these shapes are not particularly geometric, but they are all certainly precise. And the organic sort of flowing nature of them makes them feel more alive and dynamic, as well as the composition really give it a lot of energy. There's some triangular shape language doing that, but also a bunch of circular shape language as well that help keep it very friendly. Now, I love this example here on the right because it's essentially showing a sequence, and we can see different shape language in there doing different things. At the start up here, it's pretty organic. We have a lot of round circular shape language, and then we get this little frame that pulls out and we get a moment of hyper focus of this fixation. And this is framed by a rectangle, square shape language, and there are squares in the background. And then we zoom out again, we get all these circular and organic shapes, and then again, that reintroduction of this triangular shape language for the motion of the ball. So it almost kind of feels like a tension and release of this moment of focus where we're zooming in, looking at this ball, and then flicking at that big motion of it going into the cup here. Very dynamic, a really inspired use of all design language techniques in this. Now, I also want to show you pretty much the absolute extreme level of mastery that can be achieved in making something look organic with very geometric shape language. So I want to show you a bit of the work of James Gilead, who uses pretty much exclusively geometric shapes to represent.
Holy fuck, cái này là vẽ. Uầy, nhưng mà lúc đầu nhìn tưởng xong mẹ chụp ảnh không, nhưng mà uầy, kinh vãi. Dùng shape mà đạt thực không, điên vãi.
Well, often very geometric man-made objects, but also really organic objects as well. Check out this design for Red Dead Redemption. Purely organic scene, nothing in here is man-made, except I guess for the clothing on that character here, but everything else is naturally formed and feels.
Đây là kiểu những nghệ sĩ trong người ta được boost thêm sức mạnh của phần mềm rồi, chứ còn không phải là đẳng thực đâu.
Feels naturally formed, but it is made with all these fantastic geometric elements. Same with this tropical island and this dinosaur skull. These are fantastic. A lot of these are made of simple geometric shapes, but they have been combined together or used next to one another to kind of imply and build on previous ones so we get some more organic forms. Absolutely love his work. These are really fantastic. But this is the example I wanted to particularly highlight. These gorillas, their environment. And one factor that leads us to believe that these are all natural, even though they're using a geometric language, is the consistency. Everything in this image is using that same type of geometric shapes. If only a small selection of them were using geometric shapes and the other one was using organic shapes, it would feel a lot different. Let's separate the gorillas and the plants. If the gorillas, we made them out of organic shapes, the plants might feel like robotic. Are these sort of artificial plants? Same if we flip it. If all the plants were made with looser organic shapes that were sort of hand-drawn, and the gorillas were made out of these geometric shapes, they would feel like, are these cyborg gorillas? But because everything is consistent, we don't question that. The consistency of shape language here is essential for the communication of this scene. But of course,
mình sẽ gặp nếu như mà mình chơi kiểu chắp vá hình từ trên free pick về, xong rồi mình compose ra cái composition của mình, lấy mỗi nơi một tí. Cái này anh không để ý, kiểu trông nó cứ không hợp vì lý do vì sao ấy, vì nó dùng cái ngôn ngữ geometric khác nhau, nên trông cái thì cứng quá, trông cái thì nó lại bị lỏng quá.
you can, of course, blend and combine geometric and organic shapes. In fact, most designs do have a blend. And I'm a particular fan of designs and illustrations that really blend the two and draw attention to that. So here are some more specific botanical examples from a few different artists. And here we get that calculated mathematical precision and satisfaction that triggers that part of your brain with the geometric shape language, but also that natural, organic beauty of flowers and plants, or those natural objects. And these kind of combinations bring them together in a way that highlights the beauty and connectiveness of, all that surround us. Now, this isn't, easy at all to create things like this. You do have to find and abstract shapes down into geometric shapes and refine them, but not to do that too simply, and finding ways to create those natural forms and building them out of geometric shapes. But I love that you can see constraints in these examples. These, I believe these are chives. Let's just say there are chives in this example. I love that how at the top here, all of the curves and arcs that they make are all segments of sort of a precise circle. You can see it very extremely in these sections sticking out here at the sides. But at the top here, we can also see that these are just sort of arcs from segments of a circle that have become tapered. And in some areas, they feel really natural when they're kind of overlapping with one another, but then when they're sticking out by themselves, it kind of breaks that illusion a little bit, and you see that they're made up of essentially straight lines that have kind of been rounded at the corners. I really think that makes these very compelling. This is very difficult to do. It's a delicate balance, but it is wonderful when it's executed as well as this. So you don't need to restrict yourself to just organic shapes to create natural things, or just organic shapes to create unnatural things. So let's take a quick look at some artwork, some illustrations that I did recently. These were for a zine for Camp Mograph Australia. I created a little foraging guide of some mushrooms, some that were edible and some that are poisonous. And it's a fun task to kind of have that contrasting imagery, one side that feels very friendly and one side that feels very, very threatening. So these are all completely hand-drawn with pen and ink. I use brush pens for these. So besides the border, these are all very organic shapes. And I'm depicting organic objects. So I'm not particularly trying to balance geometric and organic objects here. I'm just more exploring shape language. And these were kind of made to be in a sort of handbook, sort of scout guide illustration style. So on the left, we have these edible mushrooms, on the right, poisonous. And as you can see on the left, there's a lot more circular language and a lot more triangular on the right to make them seem a bit more evil, a bit more menacing. The one I think that is the most successful, that is my favorite of these, which is the most extreme, is this one here, number 7 with the fangs. Really big, sharp elements. They are long, they are thin. They're nothing but pure, sharp, triangular language meant to be threatening and dangerous. You do not want to touch.
Mấy quả edit boy trông cũng không ăn được lắm. Trông cũng kiểu nấm ấy. Trông kiểu gây ảo giác phết. Trông cũng ảo giác vờ lờ luôn.
Any of these. And also I've used some rounded shape
Cơ bản
languages.
là cái style vẽ như này, đánh bóng, đổ bóng kiểu như này, trông nó cũng đã hơi cảm giác cũng đã hơi cảm giác kiểu gì nhỉ? Nguy hiểm rồi ấy.
Creepy.
Creepy rồi. Trông cho
Tất cả cũng không biết cái mục đích của cái guide này nó như thế nào ấy. Nếu mà muốn chỉ mọi người theo vào đọc ấy thì nên kiểu vẽ sát nhất để mọi người có phân biệt ấy. Nên cũng không rõ là kiểu cách điệu như này thì nó có hiệu quả thật không. Ok, để minh họa thì ok.
Cái này cho màu vào chắc là nó sẽ dễ hơn, để dễ phân biệt hơn, nhưng mà kiểu chơi texture bóng cái này thì mình nghĩ là mình thường hay không biết nữa.
As well for the top of the mushroom. But these are also to imply kind of a sort of snarling mouth of maybe a dog or a wolf or even a spider, something where the lip would rear up and these teeth would be coming down. So even though they're rounded elements, I think because we're associating them so much with how a mouth, an organic sort of creature would retract that lip shape to show off the fangs, it kind of enhances that. So the context of that shape kind of overrides the roundness and friendliness of it in this case. Now, the one on this side, probably my second favorite, is this one over here. And this one is probably the friendliest shape. This is using the most round shape language that isn't threatening at all. But how we tell this is poisonous and dangerous, it doesn't come from the shape language, but from the symbols in the pattern here. So we have these ghostly wailing faces that are repeated, and we recognize these as being, fearful. This is, a representation of a human screaming or wailing. And this one doesn't feel as maybe immediately dangerous, but maybe more spooky. But without these symbols, this would just seem like a regular, friendly mushroom. So using shape language alone isn't the only way we can communicate a feeling or emotion. These shapes certainly do help us communicate, but the kind of next level of communication with shape is when that shape becomes a symbol. When the context of that shape is repeated so often that what it's communicating becomes sort of embowed with meaning and understood by a community. So it's when shapes can communicate something more specific and some more complicated ideas directly that become symbols, and we can use them like I've used here. So shape language kind of interacts with us at a more of an instinctual primal level. But we also have a reaction to shapes that have been socially constructed, like these ones here. And these ones have taken on meaning over time, depending on how they have been used by others. And these symbols aren't always universal. They can be very localized and vary significantly across cultures, across time.
Có biết cái ông tạo ra cái hình mặt cười này không? Cái người tạo ra hình mặt cười.
từng nghe thôi,
Ờ,
cũng chưa tìm hiểu rõ lắm. Một ông người Nhật đúng không? Hay là đâu? Sao nhỉ?
Smile Face Inventor. Đây là cái ông mà sáng tạo ra mặt cười. Trông ông ấy trông cũng có vẻ đau khổ phết. Nghịch lý ấy. Smiley face. Đấy, có những thứ xong rồi cái này sẽ khá là hợp với mấy cái meme mà trước khi mà mặt cười được sáng tạo ra ấy, đấy, thì người ta sẽ như thế này. Tại sao nhỉ? Anh nghĩ kiểu cái này nó quá là bình thường đến mức mà anh nghĩ là không 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 cần phải người ta phải
Không
phát minh,
cần.
đúng không? Mà mình có thể, nhưng mà cuối cùng hóa ra nó lại vẫn được. Đấy, gọi là tạo ra và được công nhận rộng rãi. Hoặc là có những thứ như kiểu hình ngôi sao, hình trái tim ý. Đấy, hình trái tim chẳng hạn. Nhưng mà hóa ra là ở lúc nào đó trong khoảng thời gian ấy, những cái hình đấy nó không hề có cái ý nghĩa gì hay cảm xúc gì với người khác cả. Cho đến khi mà nó được tâm niệm rộng rãi. Ê, chịu. Không, kiểu người ta dành cả đời người ta không không có hạnh phúc cái thứ.
Names across places. Let's take a quick look at some of the most extreme examples. Here we have the swastika, which has been a symbol of peace in East
Vãi.
Asia in a variety of cultures for hundreds, maybe thousands of years, but more recently a symbol of hate for the last 80 years or so. Now, of course,
Phát
this
xít.
is the most extreme example. Another one is these two lines. Don't really mean anything on their own, but when we align them, they make a cross, a crucifix, a cruciform, and it's probably the most recognizable symbol in the world. And it's simply two intersecting lines, one shorter and displayed asymmetrically. And there would be very few people on Earth that don't have an understanding of what these two intersecting lines mean. Whether you are religious or not, many of you would have a clear understanding of what these represent. So one of my favorite pieces of media, maybe my favorite TV series, is Neon
Ôi
Genesis
giời, chắc
Evangelion.
chắn là
And they use a ton.
anh đang nghĩ đến đúng ngày đấy luôn. Ờ,
Chưa xem.
đang nghĩ ngay ông Ano luôn. Nhưng mà quả này ông Ano bảo là mẹ tôi chỉ to cái hình này vào thôi cho nó đẹp chứ tôi cũng chẳng có ý nghĩa mẹ gì về tôn giáo cả. Thế là tôi
Giống
tôi tôi
kiểu
nghĩ
nhà văn và giáo viên dạy văn.
tôi nghĩ thế là nó ngầu, thế là tôi cho vào, người ta phỏng vấn hẳn như thế mà. Chứ nó chả có ý nghĩa gì về tôn giáo cả, nhưng mà người ta lại, nhất là các fan lại thấy ui mẹ thật là mẹ biểu tượng của mẹ cái chết các thứ. Thích phân tích. Mọi người xem phim này hết chưa? Đã có con ai trong này chưa xem được Evangelion nhưng mà bản
Em
Genesis?
chưa,
Em chưa á?
Tôi tôi không
em
xem
chưa.
anime.
Thế á, đi lượt chưa xem à? Cái
Không, tôi không
này
xem một phim nào anime luôn.
đây là một trong những cái pop culture của Nhật Bản mà nó có sức ảnh hưởng nhất thế giới, gần như là một trong những IP có sức ảnh hưởng nhất. Bên cạnh
Anh không
Ừm,
xem Attack on Titan ha.
ví dụ
nhưng
mọi người
mà đây là lần đầu tiên mình thấy ảnh này, với lần đầu tiên nghe thấy tên này.
không, bây giờ thử
Hay
nhưng chắc chắn là nhìn này thì biết này, Evangelion.
Không, chưa bao giờ nhìn
cái
thấy
cái
luôn.
cái cái palette màu tím với cả xanh này là gần như là cứ nhìn thôi là biết ngay thuộc về cái nhân vật này. Một trong những bộ sức ảnh hưởng nhất, nó vừa là về mecha nhưng mà nó cũng là về kiểu chung là mẹ cái bộ này dark vãi. Xong rồi suốt ngày hỏi là bộ này có ai chết không, nhịt vậy. Có từng thấy. Chắc chắn rồi. Eva 01 này. Cái màu hai cái màu tím với xanh này à, được được kiểu represent, gần như là nó là thành cái palette màu đặc trưng cho cái con này luôn. Chết hết hả anh? Đúng rồi em ạ, cả cái địa cầu nó bay màu hết, nó phải tận diệt hết.
ơ kìa, spoil.
Nhưng chết thì nào nó mới là nó cái kiểu khác em ạ. Sau này rất nhiều anime về mecha và văn hóa đại chúng bây giờ là nó đều kiểu refer đến cái bộ này, mặc dù nó tạo ra từ những năm 90 rồi sao anh không biết nữa. Nhưng mà đến bây giờ giá trị của nó vẫn còn xem lại. cái bộ gốc của nó thật sự vẫn vẫn kiểu rất là sâu sắc, gây sốc ấy. Nó là kiểu một cái bộ mà nó núp bóng là anime về robot với cả ờ, các thứ ấy, nhưng thật ra nó là về kiểu tâm lý cực nặng luôn,
Ừ.
giống kiểu mấy bộ về Attack on Titan thì đấy, giấu ở trong bề ngoài là kiểu Titan các thứ chiến đấu với quái vật, nhưng thật ra nó là bộ về chiến tranh các thứ, về về nghịch lý trong chiến tranh. Cái bộ này được coi là huyền thoại
Anh
đấy.
phải đọc đi.
Đâu rồi, đâu rồi.
Em chỉ biết mấy cái meme về bộ này, em chưa xem.
Về cái meme
Cũng
á.
chưa biết bắt đầu từ đâu. Cái gì Shinji Get Into Robot.
Shinji đúng không?
Of crucifix imagery, like a lot. And the natural instinct would to think, oh, they're using this Christian symbolism as a shortcut to tell more things in their story. Because we already have an idea of what those mean, they can take that and shortcut that and explore those themes in a
Này
different
nghĩa là gì nhỉ? Nó
context.
phải biểu tượng tái sinh hay gì không? Anh không biết, anh không theo đạo. Crucify kiểu bị đóng lên trên cây thánh giá ấy.
But that is
Đúng.
not the case at all. And the creators have mentioned
Okay.
that. One in particular that I have a direct quote from is from the assistant director, Kazuya Suramaki. And he says here, because Christianity is an uncommon religion in Japan, we thought it would be mysterious.
Đấy,
None of the
tôi nghĩ
staff
thế là
who
ngầu
worked on
đấy.
Ava are Christians. There are no actual Christian meaning to the show. We just thought the visual symbols of Christianity
cool.
looked cool. If we had known the show would get distributed in the US and Europe, we might have rethought that choice.
Nhưng mà
So I found out
chính vì thế nên là bọn Tây chúng nó lại rất là thích.
about this after I had watched the series, and that did surprise me. And upon reflection, I thought that that imagery did make my experience of watching the show stronger. The themes that one might infer from this imagery do work synergistically with the themes of the show, but it certainly was different than what they are intending. Evangelion as an artistic work is specifically left open to interpretation by design. But their choice to include these symbols without knowing the audience and how they would react to them meant that they weren't in control of that interpretation. So that is something that we should be aware of. If we don't make the choices of what our shapes are communicating and what symbols we're using, the audience will, and it might not be what we want. Now, if for the majority of their imagery of the cross they had moved this bar downwards, we get a symbol that represents something more demonic. And that could be much different interpretations. Just a small position of the line changes the interpretation of events and perceiving something as good or evil. So when you are using symbols in your work, it is important to kind of know the context of what that symbol means and whether that means something completely different, and know what audience you're using that symbol for. And of course, we never have 100% control, but when we do, we should exercise it. So we can make big choices like including recognizable symbols or imagery in our work, or more subtle ones. But every choice will affect how that work is perceived and understood on some level. So know if you're making big design choices or little ones. And of course, we can use symbols and design language to reinforce or contradict these symbols. So the skull, a pretty universal symbol. This represents danger, death, or poison if it's paired with crossbones or even piracy. But let's apply our three basic shape languages to it. Here I've made three different abstractions, one making it a lot more circular, one making it a lot more triangular, and one a lot more square. The circular one definitely makes it a lot more friendly. The triangular one even more dangerous, and this square one, it feels very sort of Cro-Magnon, very early man skull, so maybe a bit more dim-witted, a bit more stubborn perhaps. And within these sort of exercise and experiments, I'm sort of intuitively adding more of my existing ideas of what these shapes mean. I know if I make these teeth a lot sharper, it is going to be a lot more threatening, a lot more menacing. But of course, this is a spectrum, so I made a couple more designs, sort of taking the circular design and adding a bit of triangular language to it and a bit more square language to it. So this one, it seems a lot friendlier than this one, but a little more dangerous and threatening than the purely round one. Same with the square one. It's a bit more friendly and not as kind of as stubborn and blockish and brutish. So these all factor in, and these are just directions that we can push our design to communicate one emotion more than another. So we can refine it, we can make it a bit more round, a bit more sharp, a bit more square. It doesn't need to sit into these three categories of being friendly or evil or sturdy or stubborn. Now, a skull is probably the maybe oldest and most universal symbol that we have on Earth. But we also have new symbols and new visual cues that are always emerging. One that I want to talk about is this symbol here that you probably know as the design for Apple's Siri, their AI voice assistant. Now this is a circle with some sort of rotating abstract shapes inside it. This is a fairly abstract representation. They are not using sort of sound waves or microphones. This only really represents a voice talking to us in the most abstract sense that it would kind of move and react as an audio input was given into it. But this has become a strong symbol. If we search on Pinterest or Dribbble or any other large resource for AI voice, here I've just searched for AI voice motion design, so we might get some more specific examples. We see so many similar designs. They are all circles, all with some curvy abstract shapes in them. Some of them do include microphones and sound waves. But let's scroll down and we're going to see just a couple of nonsense AI generated images. But as we go, there are just so many that reiterate this symbol. And I'm not trying to say that these are all inferior copycats. I'm sure some are. I'm sure some others are probably well designed. I'm not going to pass judgment scrolling past these without knowing the context they were designed in or who they were designed for. The point is that we can use this knowledge to help us in the comprehension of our designs by using these symbols. Evidently, these shapes and these colors, I didn't even mention all the colors are all very similar as well, all sort of purple and blue tones with dark backgrounds, pretty much. But we can use these shapes and these colors because evidently they are now familiar to the audiences for these applications, these symbols for a voice-triggered AI assistant. And if we use a similar shape, not the exact same shape, we can assume some understanding of that from our audience and leverage that to make it more clear what we're communicating. Not to suggest that the best way to communicate an idea with design is to copy a popular design that communicates the same thing, but we can look at it and reference it, find out why it communicates that, and use the shared knowledge and understanding of it in our design in an effective way. So while searching for similar examples, here's one I found that I think is effective. This is a UI design by Sergey Gurov, and this is not the exact same shapes and colors, which is good. But it is very clear communication. So it's using the symbol of a microphone here and some sound waves as well, but also this overlapping abstract blobby shape, like with Siri, that reinforces that an AI assistant is listening. So using this app, I don't think there would be any confusion. Probably doesn't even need the microphone or the sound waves, but this is a newer technology, so often it is better to over-communicate it, and it doesn't make it look crowded or inelegant by any means. They're just using these shared symbols to communicate clearer. And of course, symbols change over time. So one symbol that has changed over my career as a designer is the depiction of phones. I'm not even talking about rotary phones or early cell phones from the 90s or even flip phones. For the majority of time,
Đúng rồi, nói về biểu tượng về cái phone thì nó là cái điện thoại cắm dây mà nó có hai cái đầu nghe đúng không? Đây là kiểu này này.
Yep.
Ờ,
Yep.
nhưng bây giờ thì phone thì dùng
Rồi.
như này.
that I've been designing, it has been the era of the smartphone. So the iPhone
Đúng rồi. Không có một cái nào
Ừ.
là cái nút vuông của Samsung hay các thứ luôn, luôn luôn là cái nút tròn. Kinh thật. Kinh thật. Phải gọi là design đến mức độ nào mà trở thành biểu tượng. Đúng rồi, kiểu bây giờ không còn ai dùng đến cái biểu tượng này nữa đúng không? Kiểu màn hình mà lại còn có cả viền viết các thứ xong rồi nút hai bên này, không ai dùng cái này nữa rồi. Như này trông đã cổ rồi, như này trông cũng cổ rồi. Nó cứ ra một đời iPhone. Bây giờ bất cứ cái gì liên quan đến phone là phải có thêm cái tai thỏ hoặc là cái Dynamic Island nữa. Đẳng cấp, quá đẳng cấp. Đúng là chỉ có các đấng Apple có thể định nghĩa về thế nào là điện thoại.
first came out in 2007. So that's 17 years ago. I know, don't remind me. But that was the clearest way to show a mobile phone or cell phone. We call it a mobile in Australia. Would depict them mainly following the designs of the iPhone or similar, slightly more generic versions. But these have become default imagery for phones. And that's kind of been simplified as the designs of the phones themselves are simplified. It started with a much thicker bevel. We'd have a button and several buttons to the side. Then it was just a button and the camera or the microphone at the top. Then just the button. And then the button was gone. And to make it not just be a rectangle, I've included the kind of notch, which is the modern iPhones today. And that notch was a bit of a relief because otherwise it just would be a rectangle. And this notch does give it a very unique shape that really doesn't have any other interpretation. Maybe it's kind of similar to a clipboard, perhaps. But that's it. I do miss the time when phones did have this, have the button here, because that was definitely a more unique signifier. Oh, that this was a phone. And now I do think the ubiquity of phones being everywhere and used by everybody all the time, a rectangle, maybe a rounded rectangle, is all you need. Yeah, it
Chuẩn
doesn't
luôn,
even need to be rounded. If a character is holding a
chuẩn
rect,
luôn. Bây giờ chỉ cần đúng một cái hình chữ nhật bo góc này thôi là nó đã cảm giác là mình lại tưởng là cái phone này. Sợ thật. Thế là xã hội
rectangle in their hand, I would assume it is a phone. It is at least of a similar size to this. Could it be a smaller phone? It could be a large phone. And I think, in fact, it would need additional context and more visual cues and symbols for me to assume it was something different, like a notebook or a calculator. If it was a notebook, you'd have, spiral rings maybe at the top, or maybe a loose page tearing off to the side. Now, I want to quickly touch back on a few more symbols I've used in these mushroom examples, because I've used quite a few symbols in here. Obviously, we have these screaming, wailing faces, which have kind of used an abstraction of the kind of ghost-faced mask from Scream, which I believe was influenced by 1930s cartoon ghosts, and not the Edvard Munch painting of the Scream. I did have to look that up, though, just to get some extra context of the symbols that I was using, so that I wasn't just ignoring an example I said earlier. And the other obvious example is the smiley faces on this mushroom. But also, even on this mushroom here, which has a leopard print and a fancy hat, to me, these are symbols of partying and fun and a good time. You wouldn't see many folks wearing leopard print to a serious occasion, to a funeral or a job interview at a bank. It works by those having a fun association, putting out a statement that this is for a good time, whether it's on furniture or fashion. A leopard print pattern is loud and draws attention, and they are also sort of blobby, friendly, organic shapes as well. Also, one set of mushrooms here has devil horns. So 2 pointy horns that we can imply the devil, a demon, evil personified, but also has that very literal pointy shape language as well, which makes them sort of dangerous for touching. They are kind of spiky. They might cause harm. Wet horns, when animals have them, they're used for defense or for a weapon mainly, but also occasionally for display as well, to show other animals in their species, look how big and dangerous I am, which is probably, the origin of them being associated with the devil. Though I haven't looked deep into that context. Maybe there's some other origin. But I've also used some imagery here on these mushrooms where I've given them kind of boils, so they look kind of ill and sick and sort of dripping. Things that we would associate with disease, I guess, to make these look even more threatening and poisonous and particularly potent. And here on the left, we've got an eye, kind of representing a third eye and making them seem a bit more psychedelic. And here I've literally just used a donut. And you can see I've named this one a Blende Tutorialis Bellatus. Here, this is for an audience of motion graphics artists that would only be reading the scene. So to a lot of them, a donut is a symbol of a Blender tutorial. So I knew my audience, I was able to get away with this in here too.
Đó là nổi tiếng đến mức nhìn thấy cái donut là nhìn thấy Blender chịu rồi. Donut Blender Guru. Nổi tiếng đến mức đấy chịu. Nó nên trở thành một cái biểu tượng của Blender, đấy là cái bánh donut.
Another audience, a donut on a mushroom wouldn't mean anything at all. That would just be a bit confusing. But also the interpretation is that, it would be delicious candy cake treat, a lovely pastry to have, which kind of works for it as well. So we know how to choose what shapes to use to communicate an emotion and to add comprehension to our design, and using symbols as well to reinforce that. But we also have another powerful tool in our toolkit that is often overlooked, which is the choice of what to depict in the first place. And I'm going to call that casting, as if we are casting a movie. We want to pick the best actors for the role. We want to pick the best symbols, the best imagery for our design. Because we are not just in charge of casting our scene, we're also the set decorator, we're also the prop house. In a film, there can be whole departments, multiple departments even, whose job it is to decide what every single object on screen is. Even location scouts deciding where a scene should be set. So if we're designing a scene, and it is of someone working at a desk, or just of someone's desk, someone's workspace, we have a choice of what kind of chair they're going to sit in. We might give them a fairly standard office swivel chair. It's probably the default option. Or we could give them a Herman Miller Aeron chair, very expensive, prioritizes ergonomics. Or maybe just a wooden dining chair they've had to repurpose from their kitchen. Or
Uầy, con này 80 60 triệu ha. Tầm này gần này đô phải 80 triệu. Uầy. What the fuck?
Không bàn được lời.
Quả thị trường ghế công đại học này kinh khủng phết nhỉ. Thôi bây giờ chắc vẫn còn người dùng ghế nhựa để ngồi làm việc vẫn được mà.
Or a folding chair, maybe they are down in their luck and that's all they have
Chắc chắn là thầy
available.
Ben sẽ
Maybe
không
their
thích cái
priority
ghế
at this
đấy, cái ghế uống bia, ghế nhựa của đơn hãng nào ấy nhỉ? Ghế nhựa Tiền Phong à? Không biết nữa.
workstation isn't for work. Maybe it is for gaming. Or we could even make it more ridiculous, like this insane scorpion gaming workstation chair. Or a yoga ball chair that they're sitting on.
Uầy,
Or one of those
có ai ngồi trên cái ghế này thật à? Ngồi trên ghế này để làm việc à? Hay là motion, làm
Đây là
motion thì người cũng phải motion nhún nhún. Chịu rồi.
ones that are ergonomically designed.
Nó có quả ghế quỳ ấy, mọi người đã ai dùng thử vào ghế quỳ chưa? Anh không biết
em
cái
dùng
đấy.
rồi,
Thế á, nó như nào? Nó có thật sự là kiểu
nó
không có áp lực lên lên lưng không?
không mỏi lưng lắm anh ạ.
Mỏi
Tức là mình ngồi mình cảm thấy kiểu nó cũng thoải mái hơn ấy, thoải mái hơn bình thường, nhưng mà kiểu ngồi lâu rồi anh cũng vẫn sẽ kiểu thói quen cũ anh sẽ gù lưng xuống thôi.
đúng rồi, nó là do thói quen.
Ừ.
Ngồi công ty học vẫn có thể bị đau lưng cơ mà, có vấn đề gì đâu.
Thế rồi mình sẽ
So you're kind of kneeling at your desk. The choice of casting a chair makes a big difference on how we would understand that scene, the context of the person that's using it, their priorities, even their income potentially by how expensive some of these are. And of course, we can take the literal designs, these objects as they are designed, and embellish them with shape language to maybe make them feel more secure or more playful or even more dangerous and threatening, as this scorpion one is here. Whereas instinctively, the yoga ball one seems a lot more friendly and easygoing, and maybe a lot more natural and organic because it's a more rounded, soft shape. Whereas this wooden chair seems like the most sturdy and rigid and is not, ergonomically designed for much movement or working. It is used for,
Yeah.
small stints.
Quá nhầm, thế là thầy Ben chưa xem phim của Gai Makoto rồi. Làm quả cái ghế mà mẹ chạy được như này thì không di chuyển được ấy.
chịu rồi anh, quả phim ấy chịu rồi. Tội.
So of sitting and eating. And researching can be a fun, exciting part of the process where you can make more creative choices. And also don't be afraid to be specific with your casting choices. It can be so easy to just default to a basic generic design because it might appeal to a lot of people and it's the first thing you think of. But it appealing to a lot of people is far less of an issue than you think. I think you connect to an audience by being more specific to them. And even if someone who isn't in that specific audience that you've designed it for, if they see it, that's fine. More than likely just see a rich world that maybe they don't appreciate the nuances of, but it will seem more real and authentic, even if it isn't specific to them. So casting is important because it's a powerful storytelling and communication tool. And it is easier for us than it is for those who are art directing and set decorating a movie, because we don't need to source and pay for these objects. We don't need to find a location that's available that we can get a cast and a crew to. We just need to imagine. Do a bit of research, of course, but imagine what would be the most effective object or setting to communicate our message. And we can spend the same amount of time drawing a mansion filled with rare antiquities or a dorm room filled with IKEA basics. Not that it is always better to show more, but remember that we do have that choice. We can source the exact specific type of lamp that is the perfect shape, the perfect color, and emits the perfect amount of light that we want to set our scene to convey the emotion that we want. We don't have to depict the first thing that comes to mind. Taking the time to make more deliberate choices is absolutely worth it. If we were showing a design studio and we wanted it to be seen as fun and creative, we might give them more MacBook-shaped laptops. But if we were showing a VFX house and they've got beefy PCs and servers for all the 3D work they might be doing, or maybe we're advertising a new software and they don't need that hardware, so maybe they're now on laptops and doing all that beefy stuff from a cafe. Those set decorating choices help communicate. And it doesn't have to be physical objects either. It could just be the patterns, or like we've said before, the shapes. What color, what type of rectangles are going to reinforce our intention? So let's say we're just designing an end card, not even a specific scene with no objects. We just got a background that we're going to have to populate with shapes. Casting specific shapes can communicate and reinforce the tone of this end card or this title. Let's just assume all the time is determined by a style guide. I'm using a very neutral typeface. I'm going to use the same copy. It's just boring. It's just generic. On sale now. yourclientswebsite.com, terms and conditions. These are the most neutral sounding words you could possibly choose. And again, copywriting as well, choosing the words that you use also have an emotion and can impact the design in the scene as well. Often copywriting isn't a part of our job, but if we're creating personal projects or designing scenes where there are written elements, choose more evocative language that helps set the tone as well. But here, we're going super generic. So the shapes that we put in the background, we could choose sort of more organic, natural, blobby shape with round shape language. It could be a premium ceramic store that makes sort of handmade artisan pottery for sale. But if we used more geometric language, more angled trapezoids, maybe this feels a bit more futuristic, a bit more tech focused. Now this might seem super basic, and now I'm returning back to the more basic elements of shapes, but that is just because these are overlooked all the time, especially in an attempt to make something look cool. If you know how to make a slick gradient filled sort of techie shape animation that looks premium, it can be very tempting to include that or elements of that in every project you make. But if that's not the right audience that you're creating for, it doesn't matter how cool it looks. It's not appropriate. It's not communicating at all. If it is, it's the wrong message. That is not good design, even if it looks cool. So last in this chapter, I want to look at a few examples of scenes that use fantastic sort of casting and shape language to build a specific world. And these are just desks. And I've got 4 examples here. The first 2, this one is by Velatin Payadas. I believe, forgive my pronunciation if that's correct. And their interpretation of this desk is great. This is fun. It is alive. There are characters moving about and living in this world. This feels like an adventure. Lots of round shaped language. Everything is a bit thicker and blockier. I think the chords and the cable.
Nhìn mấy thứ này anh lại tưởng tượng là cái gì đấy kiểu nguy hiểm hoặc là không an toàn nó sắp xảy ra ấy. Hay là do mình xem Don't Touch Me I'm Scared nên là mình bị Mọi người có biết cái series đấy không? Thì đấy trên YouTube tôi nhớ là anh chỉ giới thiệu anh đừng xem. Cái này này, một cái series ở trên YouTube, người là một công dân của YouTube thì chắc
Cuộc,
chắn là đã từng nghe đến cái này.
cuộc đời đã trải qua những gì vậy?
Kiểu nó mang cái bề ngoài là kiểu hoạt hình trẻ con nhưng thật ra nó rất là dark, rất là conspiracy, nó rất là nhiều hình ảnh kiểu gây sốc, xong rồi man dợ ấy, kinh vãi lều.
Là Happy Tree.
Happy Tree Friend nó cũng kiểu như thế, nó cũng bắt đầu như thế. Thế là tự nhiên nhìn những cái kiểu hình ảnh kiểu nó thân thiện quá mức làm cho mình không không thoải mái. Cái gì nó sắp xảy ra. Cái này ghê vãi. Hiểu mà nó lại còn công khai trên YouTube nhá. Mình tự hỏi là bây giờ một đứa trẻ con ở đấy mà vô tình bắt vào một quả video như này, xong cũng xem cũng bình thường, xong bắt đầu đầu rơi máu chảy, xong rồi nó bị tay chân các thứ hành hạ những loại động vật dễ thương này, không biết là ảnh hưởng gì đến tâm trí chúng nó không. Thế mà không ai gỡ xuống mấy cái này cơ, sợ thật. Mà ngày xưa anh cũng là người vô tình xem vào những cái video này đấy.
Chết rồi.
Vô tình. Ám ảnh.
Ám ảnh luôn mà. Hiểu.
For the mouse and the keyboard are. I love that they've exaggerated that just to avoid sort of thin lines. And these are much thicker than they need to be. There are much thinner elements in this design, but they've said, no, these are going to be thick because that is unusual for these objects. And I think that really helps, as well as sort of abstracting the keyboard down to just be 3 buttons tall and however many buttons long, all the same shape. Really fun. Even the decision to leave the tea bag in the cup says a little something about the type of person that would use this desk. Not that I'm going to pick sides. I think that there is a time and place for leaving the tea bag in or not. The only thing that kind of really stands out for me is this poster in the background. Seems a bit more frightening than what is shown here. But maybe that's kind of like a "Don't hug me, I'm scared."
Ôi chuẩn mẹ luôn. Ôi shit. Đúng luôn, đúng luôn cái vibe của anh. Trời ơi. Sợ thật.
Horror element there, including into this otherwise friendly scene. And then this design by Clint Hess. Now this one is clearly designed almost to be a self-portrait of them, filled with details about things that make them, their interests, their ideas. In particular, I really love the live, laugh, alone sign here. That is really fun. And they've got to do today, not destroy, but create. There's a lot of fun ideas, personal knickknacks. They've got a Pokemon Poliwhirl here, Pokeball hanging off this chain here. They clearly have soda, some chips. And they have a what D&D dice, a multi-sided dice, could be for any purposes, but probably they like playing Dungeons and Dragons. And the shape language here, very round, pretty much a round, perfect circular shape anywhere it is possible to use it, which makes it feel very friendly. Even with having the character in the design they're working on smiling. It doesn't need to be smiling. They could have been designing anything, but they've chosen to make it a character that's smiling to reinforce and make us see that, oh, they are creating happy things. They're probably a happy person that is doing this. Now, like I said, this was designed that you kind of look at it like a Where's Wally. You look at the details, you find out more information about them. Probably not appropriate, this amount of detail for a motion design project if it's going to be on screen fleetingly, but we can take some elements from this, and if we were to put it in that context, they would still work well. We could pick a few elements here, like I would definitely keep the smiley face on the screen, and obviously this, the shape language and everything else can stay the same. But even choose a few objects like maybe the D20, maybe it's not a D20, the multi-sided dice here to show that this person is into gaming, but also maybe the ring light as well that they're using here to show that they are, I guess, serious about it looking good on camera. A few elements that are kind of unique to a desk that will set it apart and give us an instant picture of the character who is using this and what this desk is used for. And the last examples, we have this one from Yukai Du and Anton Michusevich. Again, apology for the pronunciation. So Yukai Du, a designer I absolutely love. And this one is for a developers conference. And although their style, their kind of design language has a lot of these fun colors, and it feels a lot more organic with the kind of gritty stroke and outline on these elements, this feels serious. They have filled this with so many lines, so many details, and everything is with square design language. The only thing that has angles is because they are squares or rectangles in perspective.
Mọi người có
But
biết
this
một
is just
cái tích về kiểu con vịt ở trong giới dev không? Đây là một cái biểu tượng này, chỉ giới dev mới biết này.
À.
Đấy,
Có.
thậm chí là người ta còn dùng cái ý tưởng này cho một cái What is GitHub trong một cái motion graphic về con vịt này.
Đúng rồi, em biết từ đấy đấy, em biết con vịt từ đấy. Chứ không vào không em không biết đâu.
Tích hoặc là cái này
Hay.
hoặc là nghĩa là khi mà một dev mà bị rơi vào cái bug hoặc là một cái gọi là một cái rối gì đấy mà không thể giải quyết được ấy, thì cách tốt nhất đấy là đặt một con vịt ở trên bàn hoặc là kể cho nó về cái cách mình giải quyết vấn đề, kể cho nó về đấy, tức là thì sau một hồi khi mà mình kể cho nó xong ấy là mình sẽ tìm ra được cái giải pháp, không phải vì con vịt nó đưa cho mình một cái câu trả lời hay gì cả, mà là khi mình break down, khi mà mình sắp xếp ngăn nắp lại cái suy nghĩ và cái logic của mình xong, mình có thể trình bày được cho một ai đấy, cái người đấy cũng chẳng cần phải có cái sự phản hồi gì cả, nhưng chỉ cái việc đơn giản là mình gọi là liệt kê ra và mình làm cho cái logic nó có trình tự, nó gọn gàng, nó có hệ thống một phát là mình sẽ biết là vấn đề nó nằm ở đâu, mình sẽ giải quyết được. Đấy, đúng rồi, giải thích con vịt đấy. Chuẩn luôn anh ạ. Thế nên là để con vịt vào đấy rất hay, nó là một cái mà nó rất là nó chỉ là một cái tích thôi ấy. Anh chả biết thực sự là dev thật người ta có đặt cái ấy không. Nhưng mà dev thì thường hay có con mèo. Designer chắc cũng thích mèo, nhưng mà cũng kiểu ngồi giải thích code cho con mèo cũng hay mà, mọi người thử đi.
serious coders. Look how much code is going on, not even on the screen, off in the cloud, on these floating documents. Everywhere in here is full of these little details. Even the keyboards, every single key is rendered. Even on this one where they've just created their own layout. And also the casting as well. They have added an ergonomic keyboard. So whoever is typing here are very serious about doing it in a way that doesn't damage their ability to work in the future. And even the duck as well. I know this from my time doing web development, that this is kind of an in-joke for developers. It's like a test. People call it like a problem-solving test. I think they call it a rubber duck test or something like that. I forget the specifics. If you're running into a problem and to kind of sort of debug and troubleshoot your code, you would describe what each line is doing to your rubber duck in simple terms so that you might encounter the problem naturally and see it from fresh eyes. So that's the only thing, that is maybe a symbol that kind of stands out, as if you didn't know that, you'd think, why the hell is a rubber duck on this desk for developers? But this design...
Thích hợp không? Không phải đi lần. Đúng rồi.
Ê, giọng của Trọng không hề thích hợp làm MC nhá. Không hợp làm MC. Nhưng mà thề luôn, kiểu giống mấy cái trò chuyện kiểu đêm muộn với lại trò chuyện tâm tình vậy.
Được.
Không hề giống host nha. Host không phải host mà giống kiểu podcast thôi, chứ còn host kiểu MC không host được.
Cái này là nghề chọn người rồi. Thôi mình sẽ tiếp tục stream.
Xem nốt bài học đi.
Được, nốt bài học nha.
It is for developers, so that is fine. And this design over here by Anton, great as well. I love how they've sort of stylized and used rounded shape language and sort of warped the perspective for them to feel, although they're still geometric, a lot more sort of wonky and fun and interesting. Clearly, this workstation is not so much a place for serious work to be done. It is a fun place, but often where things go wrong. And there are a few interesting choices as well with the casting here. Obviously, a very 90s desktop setup, which in the previous examples, well, this one certainly at least used a big boxy display monitor, but here they do as well. And of course, we've got arrows stuck into it, birds defecating on it. Interesting choice I found though was to not use the Earth on this globe. Like the layout of continents, I don't recognize those as being from Earth, so they might be from another, maybe a fantasy world. I don't recognize it at least, but it does tell us a little bit about this scene isn't taking place on Earth. Whether that was their intention or not, that's kind of the implication that I get here. This is a little bit otherworldly, a little bit more, not necessarily charm-like, but it does have that kind of more playful energy to how they've used the shapes here and what they've set it up with. Yeah, this is not a place where work is particularly taken seriously, or at least the creator of this doesn't. So in conclusion, shapes are an enormously powerful tool to communicate an emotion to your audience. Whether you're choosing square, circular, angular, triangular shape language, it has an instinctual impact on what we see. So does using geometric or organic shapes. And to have greater impact, start by casting your scene, your designs with specific details and elements for your audience and also symbols that they recognize. So we can emphasize the comprehension for clearer and more effective communication and also for better, more interesting design.
Ok, hay. Cái này ok, bây giờ sẽ tóm tắt lại bài này cùng thấy Ben lúc cuối này. Tức là trong suốt cái này mình nghĩ là nó có thể hiểu được.
Let's get
Ôi, chờ tí nhá, người chờ tí. Có cuộc gọi gấp.